Today we will talk about how intelligent investors compensate for their overconfidence. And Charlie Munger, he talks about the tendency of overconfidence in his book, Poor Charlie's Almanac, and how it can become a problem, how it makes us more stupid and less intelligent. He gave one example that 90% of Swedish drivers thought that they were better than average, which is of course impossible because only 50% could be better than average and 50% would be lower. Then the question is, why do we have this tendency of overconfidence? And why have we developed and kept this tendency? I think we developed it because it helped us to survive. Even though we took greater risks while having this tendency, it helped us to go out and explore new areas outside of the cave and find new areas where to find food, etc. And it helped us to survive. And those who had an overconfidence in their own ability, they were the ones who became brave and went out to do these things. And people who did not possess this trait, they were left behind and they did not survive. So probably that's why we still have this tendency today. Occasionally it has probably led us to go out to fight a dangerous animal alone, climb too high mountains, or eat mushrooms that we don't know if we will survive. But in the greater whole, in the big picture, it has probably helped us to survive as a group and as a species, and that's why we kept this trait. An interesting paradox is that Warren Buffett, he shares in one recording of the Berkshire Hathaway meetings that most people don't develop their full capacity as humans. And how can this be so when we have an overconfidence? Why doesn't that lead to us going out to become more knowledgeable, more well-educated, and do better things? Wouldn't that lead us to go out to start a new business or take that course or continue to study? A side effect of overconfidence could be that we think that we're smarter than we really are, so that we stop to develop. That might be a downside of having overconfidence. And this might actually lead to that we don't invest enough time and resources into our own development. And many people actually don't pick up a book after they go to college or university. And many people actually, after a few years of working, they start doing less and less just to maintain their job instead of keep developing. And Charlie Munger, he shares about the example that the only profession where people are required to maintain their level of skill is for pilots, because they cannot afford to lose their skills, because then people would die basically. So that's why pilots are required to continually upgrade their skills and using flight simulators and so on. And Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they made sure to compensate for their overconfidence by rigorous learning, by continuing to study, by spending hours each day improving themselves by learning and reading. And Warren Buffett, he focused on business, finance, and accounting and investing, while Charlie Munger, he was much more broad in his learning and studied many different subjects like psychology and business and architecture and many different subjects. Charlie Munger, for example, he had the idea that if he mastered one field, he could apply principles from that field or mental models into other areas. And by having a more broad level of mastery into many different fields, he could soon outsmart a top expert in any field. And he called this a multidisciplinary approach, that he knew many different subjects basically. And another way that they made sure to compensate for their overconfidence was by listening to each other and sharing different views on subjects. So while Warren Buffett, he was an expert in business and finance and investing, he knew that by talking to Charlie Munger, he would have another aspect, another view on a possible investment they were going to do. So, for example, Charlie Munger, he might have an understanding of how a customer might choose that product over another, or might be loyal to the company, for example. And so by understanding psychology, he could know a lot of things that Warren Buffett did not know. So while other investors only looked at numbers before they made an investment decision, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, they could talk for hours about all possible different angles. They could understand that company and that, so that they would make a smarter decision. So before they met, Warren Buffett, he used a method of investing called cigar butt investing, which means that he would look at lousy companies that were selling for below working capital. Basically, if they would be liquidated, he would free up that cash, basically. But Charlie Munger, he actually convinced Warren Buffett to change his method of investing. So he basically saw that if you could find companies that were growing and that could grow for a very long time, you simply only needed to make one right decision and just keep these companies forever. So that actually became the new mental model for how Berkshire Hathaway was working. So thanks to Charlie Munger's new way of thinking, Berkshire Hathaway invested in the chocolate company See's Candy, which enabled them later to invest in many great companies. So thanks to this decision and by keeping this company forever, that enabled them to make many great purchases and investment decisions later on. And Warren Buffett, he was so close to saying no to the deal because they thought the price was a little bit too expensive. But Charlie Munger and another friend of them convinced them to make the decision because they saw the potential that this was a great company. So can you see how an overconfident investor who thought that they knew more than others could have walked away from this decision and thought it was too expensive and not have listened to other people? Or how Warren Buffett could have stayed using the cigar butt method and not changing his ways by being too overconfident? No, they made sure to compensate for their overconfidence and listen to other very intelligent beings and continuing to study and continuing to develop. So after we have looked at these examples, what can we learn from Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett? How can we compensate for our overconfidence? Well, we could invest time and resources each day into our own development to become smarter and more well-educated each day. If you want to learn more about business and finance, we could set a clear goal. For example, I know everything there is to know about business and finance, and I set aside 1 or 2 hours each day to study this and to make sure that I know this. Another way we could make sure to compensate for our overconfidence is to talk with very intelligent individuals. Ideally, they should be more intelligent than we are or have a very different view than we have. So we also need to make sure that this person doesn't have a hidden agenda of wanting to see us fail. Because if we ask an old friend or a family member for advice, they might feel less worthy or less successful if we become more successful than they are. So they might give us advice to sabotage our projects, for example. We also need to make sure that there are no financial incentives for them to want to rip us off. Ideally, there should be a financial incentive for us both to profit from this. I think that's why Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett talked a lot to each other, and they invested in many of the same companies, because then they both were profiting from these decisions. One way how Warren Buffett compensated for his overconfidence was to invest in his weaknesses. For example, he was an introvert who liked to spend all day at the library reading about investments as a child. So he was quite a shy person. So he then invested in a course from Dale Carnegie in public speaking. And the first time that he signed up, he actually never showed up because he was so nervous. But the second year that he applied, he then showed up and participated in the whole course. And he later signed up to teach at the University of Nebraska to continue to develop his skill of public speaking and teaching. And that gave him plenty of practice before he started to hold the Berkshire Hathaway annual meetings for up to 20,000 people. There's also a fun story of how Charlie Munger practiced his weak spots. His daughter writes a story in the book Poor Charlie's Almanac about how he used to practice his tennis skills very methodically. So he bought a tennis machine that would shoot balls at him, and his daughter would witness how he would spend hours of practicing his weak spot and until he had mastered it, so that he would never lose a ball when it was shot like that. She mentions that Charlie, he would regard all aspects of life like this. And what would happen if we would invest rigorously into our weak spots? Well, chances are that we would make a lot less mistakes and that we would improve our outcome slightly. So this would give us a slight edge in business, in our career, and in our investments. And this could be a very effective way of compensating for our overconfidence. Overconfidence is enormously important in entrepreneurship and in starting a business. Because if we don't have confidence and belief in our product and in ourselves, we would never start that idea, we would never start that business or even get going. But one interesting aspect is that while overconfidence might help an entrepreneur get the courage to start and grow and maybe sell a business, overconfidence later might hurt them because they have an overconfidence in their abilities. For example, I've seen business people who, after 6 years, maybe they sell their company for $500,000 to $1 million. And when their overconfidence is at its peak, it might even look as stupidity, because now they take that capital and they think that they're much smarter than everyone else. While they should know that maybe it was a bit luck that was involved, maybe it was a bit timing that was involved. And many of them actually go to invest this money in lousy investments or start new businesses, and then they fail and they lose all that money or a big part of it. So instead of thinking that everything they touch turns into gold, a smarter decision would probably be to put 90% of that into passive investments, like an index fund, just to be safe. Or if they want to invest actively, to divide it up to 10 different bets so that they limit the downside in each bet. If one of these bets would turn into a 10-bagger, meaning that it would produce 10x returns, it would still cover up for 9 failed investments and still give an okay return. So let's say 1 million would be divided up into 10 different bets of 100,000 each. So if one of these investments turns into a 10-bagger, meaning that 100,000 becomes 1 million. If 2 of the bets stay same at 100,000 each, 200,000 in total, and the rest go to 0, you would still have made an okay overall return of 20%. So your nest egg would now amount to 1.2 million, and you would have made a 20% return, which is a totally okay return. Another slightly better scenario is that only 2 investments go to 0, 1 produces a 10-bagger, and the rest stay the same. This would result in a nest egg of 1.7 million, which would mean a 70% return. So this could be a way to reduce risk, compensate for overconfidence, and still have a great return. So the opposite of this could be the person who has just sold his or her business and goes all in on one other business or one other investment or stock. They might even borrow money to make this investment. And this is a great way to lose all your money basically and needing to start from square one again. To summarize, what are some ways we could compensate for our own overconfidence? A simple way could be to take 1 or 2 hours each day to invest in our own skills and to become more knowledgeable in our area. Another could be diversification, or to make concentrated bets with smaller amounts of money rather than our whole nest egg. So seeking out knowledgeable people and discussing our plans with them could also be a great way to compensate for overconfidence. And ideally, they should have a financial incentive to wanting us to succeed. Hope you got some ideas today how you can make smarter decisions. So have a great day and see you next week.